This is the 42 show on Tippy Point Radio. Writer and social activist Irina Dunn once said that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. And it's kind of funny and clever, but it also hurts because it's saying men are irrelevant. So today we're talking about what it is to be a man in the 21st century. How do we get out of the box society has built for men, has put us in, and tries to keep us in? As men, should we try to keep the status quo, keep things business as usual, or do we move and flow with the change, and even find ways to accelerate the change? Plus the difference between kung fu movies and Batman, the opportunity of failure, and why you should swing at everything. All this and more, as three guys pursue the answers to life, the universe, and everything.
Hello everyone, this is the 42 show. I'm Craig Merriweather. I'm here with my co-hosts Brad Olson and Morgan Boatman. And today we're talking about what is it to be a man in the 21st century. I've had this conversation before with Morgan, and it was really fascinating and interesting to me to kind of go through those issues that, sometimes are kind of swept under the rug or we don't want to talk about. And a lot of us that grew up in the 70s, we have these images of maybe John Wayne movies we saw on TV, or those World War II movies, or the Magnificent Seven, and those images in the movies are still around, the Bruce Willis movies and Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Expendables and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like we've made a massive shift over the last 20 years, maybe even 30 years. This growth spurt ever since World War II, when a good chunk of the men, the young men, went overseas and women took the jobs that we thought were only for men. Now, what is it to be a man when a lot of the jobs that we thought were only for us are being done by women, and what's our role in the family? And that's what we're talking about.
Well, first, I want to make the point that we're not here to complain about women and to blame women for our own issues, our own problems. Women are trying to find their place in the world just like we are. I think the essential problem is that the establishment or society tells people, or in this case men, who they should be, and that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily correct. In fact, it is usually not correct. So the movies that you were talking about were telling men what they should be, and that's not going to ring true for a certain part of the population. And today we're being told a different set of roles and rules, and that doesn't ring true for maybe the same or maybe a different set of the population. So my goal is to find, not in general, but in very specific terms, what it is for me to be a man, and express that. And if that is what resonates with other men, then
what's interesting, and why I'm kind of fascinated about talking about this today, because both of you have had roles that are generally rather manly. Brad, you being an ex-cop, and Morgan being a martial arts trainer and an expert, and plus all the other stuff that you do, like the Go Rock, which is kind of you'll have to explain it a little bit later, but myself, not so much, in terms of, I've never had to jump off buildings, and I never was in the military or anything like that. So it's been an interesting, I've been able to kind of stand on the sidelines and watch and not really get into the, I don't even know what to say. It's been an interesting last few 10, 20 years of kind of watching and seeing how we're trying to move through this. Because like I say, it's really only been in the last 60, 70 years with this huge amount of growth through the 50s, when the men came back from the front and they had to figure out how they're going to.
Well, there's always been a front. There's always something going on. If you want to risk your life for the cause of feeling manly. There's always been the opportunity. So we can't.
Well, and it's still there.
Blame it on World War II. Either.
Right. No. Well, but I was just throughout of necessity, women went into the factories, and that was generally a male role. You know, they had their choice of a mother, secretary.
What does that mean to you? You're defining yourself by your career opportunities?
I think we do that, yeah. And I've certainly had my time of doing that as well. It's like, what are you but you spend 40, 60 hours a week as this thing, and you get groomed for that.
That's a huge mistake.
Oh, I know, absolutely.
So I think but it's good. I mean,
but we're not told that it's a huge mistake until we get into our 40s and 50s and think, what did I do that for? What I really...
Oh, no, we're never told that.
Yeah.
But all we're told is lies.
Yeah, so, and that's why I think it's a huge... We're getting to this point where I think a lot of us are discovering and realizing that we're not our careers and our jobs. But then that begs the question of what are we? We're not told. And we have to go on this soul-searching journey.
That, I would argue, is in fact exactly what a man is for and what a man's purpose in life is.
You know, I'm in a unique situation of being a scoutmaster for a Boy Scout troop, and it's very, very interesting having the opportunity to mold these young men into being leaders and adults. And I didn't come to it with a specific religious or political ideology, because that's done in the home. And I don't want to start with some dogma and things like that, because they have this wonderful Scout law. The 12 steps of a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, kind, kind, friendly, the 12 steps. And I thought, if I can do that and hit that really hard, because it's really, really brilliant. And it's difficult, because it's not being taught in school, not being taught at home, and I have, an hour and a half a week, maybe some more time if we're going on a backpacking trip or camping or something, but even still, they want to hang with their friends. It's not like a big, I get them for 12 hours a day. I don't. They're hanging out with their friends, and and it's where else are they getting this stuff? They're not getting it at school. They're not getting it at home, because I watch the parents.
Well, it's not deemed important anymore, because there are no consequences for not having that. You can get away with being not those things and still survive. If we think that being a man is some kind of prehistoric instinct, then there were consequences for being an asshole when you grew up. But then you would not have food, you would not have a wife, you would not have a place to live.
Yeah.
But today, you can get away with it because we interact with other men less and less and in more and more prescribed ways.
Well, this is actually more interesting to me than I thought it would be when we started talking about this. I think the needs of culture are never the needs of the individual. And it seems to me that culture is really the agent that's at work in defining what gender roles are, going all the way back.
No, otherwise it'd be independent roles. It'd just be individual roles.
We would be human beings.
Yeah.
And I really think that kind of is the goal of being a man or a woman, is to realize to the fullest extent possible one's own humanity. And that transcends, I think, gender roles. You were talking about Morgan said there's always a front, and I think that's absolutely true. There's always a place where you can sacrifice yourself in the name of truth or justice or gender, or you can be an activist anywhere in the world. I don't think that's particularly effective. I think one needs to be an activist in one's own inner world, in the world of the soul. So we have a culture that functions best when roles are clearly defined. And human beings don't, I don't think we're able to be that clearly defined.
Well, we certainly don't flourish in those restricted roles. But society can. The jobs that you were talking about, Craig, it was a blessing that we got kicked out of those jobs. We were confined in those jobs, and women were confined out of them. The more we have mobility or flexibility within these social roles, the more, the easier it is to find something that fits. I think we look back at pre-World War II America and we think, oh, people were happy, we were abundant, the country seemed to work back then because there was less flexibility. There were fewer questions. You woke up in the morning and you knew who you were because the box was very small.
Because you were told what you were.
Exactly. This is not happiness. This is not fulfillment of your humanity. This is a religion, a restrictive religion of, call it gender, call it culture, call it society, call it government. You know, when you've got an engine working, if one cylinder, one piston suddenly thinks, well, I want to be the carburetor, the engine's not going to work anymore. That's the difference between social efficiency and independent realization. We should all be able to be the carburetor if we want to be.
Right, but it's also a huge blow to the self-esteem when you realize you're not that necessary anymore. I mean, and I see a huge opportunity for
only if you think society is the ultimate expression of your.
And most people do, though. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what we're told over and over again. I think we have a little unique vision of the world that's the minority. You know, we are the 1% here that's seen outside of the box. Most everybody gets a box handed to them and say, you must fit in this box.
Well, they're not listening, so we're not talking to them.
No, I don't think there's as few of us as one might think. I mean, we all come from very diverse backgrounds. We kind of end up on the same page generally. And that's encouraging to me. I think there's a lot more people, men like us out there than we realize. But these voices of society, these voices of culture are very powerful in saying what you should be. And those movies that you talked about, those are the modern voices that are saying men should be this way, men should be.
They're commercials for how a man should be. And we have, it seems like we have our 3 or 4 characters. It's just like a Shakespeare play. You know, you have your superhero, you have your romantic lead, you have your buffoon character, and it seems like this is what we're being shown as your options. And when you spend your life thinking that, okay, well, I'm a carpenter, or I am a teacher, or I am a doctor, or whatever, and that gets taken away from you for whatever reason, it's a huge self-esteem bubble burst. It's a huge kick to your self-confidence. But how do you get past that and say, okay, well, I'm not my career, I'm not this image of what the TV and TV shows in Hollywood is saying I am to be like?
Well, now you're asking a different question. How do we get past, how do we overcome our programming? That's a different question than
okay. Well, we'll save that for later then.
If you don't know where you're going, you don't know how to get there. If you want to just break out of jail, you get a file and you start filing the bars. But once you get out of jail, then what are you going to do? You're going to wind up.
Well, I think a lot of us, the jail was broken for us for whatever reason, you know, just because of the changes in the last 20, 30 years. So now we're out of jail, we're out of that box, or we can see at least out of the top of the box.
You can see that you're in a box.
So you're in a box, and let's say we know how we can get out. Then what? You know, and it could be a scary thing, because who are you if I'm no longer this job that I thought I was? You know, and who am I if my family has left me? You know, I thought I was the husband to a wonderful woman and with some kids and a beautiful house, and I had this job, and I was very dissatisfied. I started drinking, and I lost it all. So now who am I? How do I get it back?
Is that your problem, Craig?
I didn't know that last time. No, but it's a lot of people's problems. They wake up and I think Brad touched on this in the first episode. It says towards the end, he said when somebody might come to you and say, "Here are my problems," say, "This is good. I don't think we can get that back, but this is a huge slap in the face, a huge 2x4 to the head, and this is the wake-up call."
The ancient Greeks had a great concept of fate. They saw fate as an instant, as opposed to some overarching determinant of one's life. And so that essentially a blow of fate would occur. Something would happen and you're brought to your knees, and after that, your life is never the same again. That's fate. And that happens to all of us. We all have that moment. And the challenge is that the answer can't be found in the external world. The answer is only found, I think, in your inner world. And so that really heroic way of being that we see represented to us day after day, this heroic masculine who faces these daunting odds and is surely doomed, that's happening inside. You see, and that's where the real heroism is, whether you're male or female, is the willingness to meet those challenges of the inner world. So nothing is the same anymore. Well, that's what happens to us. It happens to us so often that it becomes the motif of literature and cinema and mythology. Dante says that at middle age, this is what happens to you. He says, midway through the journey of my life, I was drawn into a dark wood where the path wasn't clear. That's what happens to us. It's not about a literal journey into hell. It's a psychological hell, and that we have to learn to negotiate.
But aren't we obsessed with things like sports? We get so obsessed with a certain team, and we get obsessed with politics, one side or the other, and we'll argue and we'll fight and we'll scream and we'll I know one guy who I'm associated with through Scouts, and he'll pick on all the things from a certain side, and if you bring up a certain thing about, okay, well, yeah, but what about this issue that your side did a while ago, which seems very, very crazy and maybe even treasonous, and there's always an excuse on why that happened. Well, and that really wasn't what you think.
Like Brad said, you're using the external world to mirror your own.
But are we doing that?
You want to be right. You want to convince yourself that you're on the right path. So you come up with reasons that your path is right, and if you're of limited resources, then that means that all other paths are wrong.
But isn't that we do that because we're bored, dissatisfied, frustrated?
We do it because we're fucked up.
We do it because we think power is the answer to the problems that we're having. I wouldn't be brought to my knees if I were more powerful. And, when you talk about politics literally meant of the citizenry, the polis, the population. It's not about that anymore. It's about power. Right? It's about earmarks and pork and power. And you see things like, this increasing so-called scandal in New Jersey with Chris Christie shutting down the George Washington Bridge, right? And it was a pure power play. Whether he had something to do with it or not, we don't know, but increasingly.
But so what's I'm taking this a little off topic, but what compels somebody to stand on a cold street corner with a sign to protest the political views of the group of people on the other side of the street? I'm not swayed by somebody holding a sign on a street corner, and yet there's this.
They're trying to sway themselves. They're trying to convince themselves that they're so committed to what is right and what supports their worldview that that's their little sacrifice.
And I'm getting a little off topic because obviously women get involved with that too, but specifically, a man, do we get obsessed with our favorite team, with our political party, with, I don't know, maybe even...
Because he's too scared to look inside and see what he needs to change in himself, what he needs to admit to, what he needs to face to change.
Yeah, I think that's true. The inner world gets projected into the outer world, and we imagine we can encounter it there. It's a fascinating notion that Jung articulated in 20 volumes of so I mean it's hard to put into a pithy little saying, but essentially what we're not aware of, what we don't want to be aware of within ourselves, we project into the external world and we encounter it there. And so the war that's happening around us at any given moment, we've got war has become the biggest export the United States has. Mm-hmm. And there's a war happening at any moment, and from a Jungian perspective, one might say that that's the projection of the inner war, and it's not dealt with in a psychologically ecological way.
And it seems like it's becoming, there's more of it, it's more intense. I mean, for a while there, we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as who knows where, all these secret missions in other places. Is it coming to a head? Is it getting stronger and more prevalent because we're trying to keep hold of something that we see as we're losing grasp of? Maybe we can get woo-woo and talk about the 2012 change.
No, we don't have to go there.
But I'm just saying,
the more that a culture sees war as a solution, as an option, the more war and violence will become.
But I'm wondering why
that will happen closer and closer to home. The more we become desensitized to death and destruction on television, on the internet and stuff, the more that will seem a viable alternative to other solutions.
But it seems to be ratcheting up.
That's what I'm saying. And I just described one.
But we can even go back to the thing in Boston when they had the two guys who detonated the bombs at the marathon.
That's exactly
and
what
they shut down the city and had the paramilitary SWAT teams or whoever they were patrolling the streets.
And was there an outrage? There was no outrage.
But how does it go so far? Is it?
I just explained why. Because we're becoming more and more familiar with that, and we're seeing that as an option for everyday.
But if what Brad was saying, that it's an outward expression of inward turmoil, is it being ratcheted up because we have more inner turmoil? And do we have more inner turmoil because we think we're losing grasp of it, and we're afraid of the change that's coming on the other side?
In a word, yes.
Well, and I think too, there's a huge economic component to this. I mean, a culture of war generates an almost unfathomable amount of money. Mm-hmm. And I think that a few years ago the Supreme Court ruled that corporations are people and that money is speech. And that is really the force, I think, that shapes our society. I think we're a little delusional if we think that we're a representative democracy.
Now here's the catch. As men, we think of ourselves partly as warriors, as those who are willing to go out and fight these wars in distant lands and in our own homes and neighborhoods. The truth is that men are problem solvers, and we will seek solutions to the problems that we see. This is why we're here talking about these problems. To change, to turn away from, if you see war as a problem, to turn away from militarized police and the affronts on constitutional rights and other things of this nature, then what we need, unless you're ready to take up arms in a rebellion, is different solutions. Now, sometimes we, as men, step away and say, oh, well, the only solutions other than violence and extreme expression of my will in a unilateral way are feminine. They're weak. They're non-masculine. But the greatest solutions to the most difficult problems have not been violence and destruction. They have been originated by teams or groups of people who've come up with solutions that are constructive and let's say, creative and innovative and building.
That's why we need more people holding signs anymore, because there's nothing offered.
There's no substance.
Yeah.
There's no solution.
Well, again, and I think that was proven with the whole Wall Street protest.
Yeah.
I don't know if I even forget what they're called, but they sat outside of Wall Street, the 99 percenters, and it was like, it seemed like, okay, we might get something here.
Complaining is not a solution. Complaining is a weak, a non-position.
But they specifically had no agenda. They were just saying, here's the problem. And it's like, okay, now we can sit and we can discuss this and see how can we change this. But there was no ideas, nothing being offered. It was just like, let's protest some more.
That's
like,
fine. But you have to
But there's no-
that's a non...
It's the easiest thing to do.
Sure, complaining. I mean, that's...
But then that goes back to men as problem solvers. It's like, well, that's complaining about the problem and not even offering any solutions. And
Plus, that problem is huge and complicated, and what we need... Okay, visualize... I always like to go back to, some primitive, simple image. Okay, you live in a hut, this artificial Stone Age man, right? Your family is hungry. You have to solve that problem. That's a very simple and direct problem. That's what we were designed for. Going out and solving that level of problem as an individual or as a small team. When you're faced with a problem that you don't understand, like politics and Wall Street and stuff, you cannot offer a solution other than violence without understanding the problem, right? So if you know 2 plus 2, if you know that's math, 2 plus 2 equals 4, then you can offer a solution. If you don't know, what if the word problem is in some language you don't understand? You cannot offer a legitimate solution. You can simply say, well, this is a problem here. We need to... It's another step to come and find someone who speaks that language. Okay, you translate that, and I've got this guy who's good at, figuring out problems. If he knows the language, then this is what we need to do. We've developed a culture, or we've been tailored into a culture where we drive around in individual vehicles and we communicate through the computer, and we're all these. And in fact, we believe that our individual, that America builds the individual so that he can succeed. But there's no success story that is an individual success story. That's the myth. That's the damaging myth that is destroying our country as it was founded and our gender as it is to be expressed.
well, I think it's very hard for a man to ask for help. That was my issue for the longest time, because I thought it didn't count if I got help.
If you got help.
And I don't know who was counting. I don't know who was keeping score, or who I was trying to please. Obviously, you're the one keeping score. It's your game.
That's right.
You're the referee. You're the umpire. You make the rules.
So it was inserted into your head. So.
Somewhere along the line between, the Jesuits would have a saying, give me the child from till 7 years old and I'll give you the man. So somewhere along the line, I was programmed that, maybe through movies and TV, that you have to do it yourself. And it wasn't until I started reaching out and asking for help that my life got better, and the success really started getting.
No great accomplishment has been achieved.
You look, they hand the director best director Oscar, and you look at the credits on that film. There's got to be 300 people who worked on that film and helped them realize. And they forget the caterer and the drivers and the.
But we idealize him.
But there's the cinematographer, the director of photography. There's all these people who help with the look of the film, the costumer, the lighting person, all that. And those people, they have their award that they get by themselves, or their crew of lighting people or costume people get their.
We understand. We do it. We worship the king. We worship a single God. We worship the president. We worship the individuals that we heap way too much responsibility on, because we hope that we can be as strong as we think that individual is.
And yet it's really interesting, because even in mass media, there's this new idea that you have to have a team. And I read this really interesting article about how the lone superhero movie is now dead. Some movies by Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Sylvester Stallone, as they were alone, just flopped, total flops. And yet those movies where they're together, like The Expendables, where they bring together 10 action heroes from the past and make this big movie, or The Avengers, or now they just did the Superman movie, but the next Superman movie will be Superman versus Batman. You're putting in there, which will lead into the Justice League movie, and the idea that a lone person superhero movie is almost gone, and they want these team movies. People helping. X-Men, another great example. Teams helping each other. So even mass media is moving away from you do it by yourself.
Also, things like Kickstarter and these other crowd-funded applications. When you watch those quote-unquote team movies, you can see how clumsy we are at depicting a real team, because we're unfamiliar with that. This is something we have to regrow in our society, in our culture.
But the rules are changing. And earlier we were talking about men as problem solvers, and it reminded me of a movie I just saw, American Hustle. And it's a wonderful, amazing movie. Great acting, great story.
Too.
Yeah, and the character, and I don't want to, I'm not going to hopefully give anything, no spoilers here, but basically it's a con movie. But the character is loosely based on the ab scam thing from 79, 80. And it's basically the character that really touched me was the character you were kind of thinking was the villain almost. And it's the mayor of, I forget which town in New Jersey. He wants to rebuild New Jersey. New Jersey is 78. 1978, the economy stinks. New Jersey's having a horrible time. All he cares about is fixing New Jersey. He wants to build Atlantic City into a casino mecca. They just got gambling through, and he wants, but it's not going very well. He wants to build Atlantic City into a gambling mecca like Las Vegas, because of the jobs it'll bring, because of how it'll help his people. And this guy is all, as you go through this movie, and at first you think, let's trap this guy and throw him in jail because he's a corrupt politician. As you get to know him, as the con people get to know him, they realize this is one of the good guys. He's doing this because he sees his constituents, and as one character said, they're not constituents, they're your family. He sees them suffering economically. And so he's doing it in maybe a little bit of an underhanded way.
Well, that's the same kind of thing when you see a heist movie, where this one guy brings together this team of experts, and they're breaking the law, but it's for a good cause.
Yeah, and they give all the money away to try.
But everyone is able to express his individual talent toward the larger goal.
Well,
that's
the thing with the mayor,
and that's what a man can actually do. He doesn't have to be responsible. I don't want to hear about your movie.
No, but no. The point I'm trying to make a movie is he's stuck in a situation. The mayor, he wants to help. He's stuck in a situation where the rules have changed. It's gambling. He has to work with the mafia. He has to work with Arab oil money. He has to work with all this stuff, and it's shady. It's underhanded. This is how he can help his community. And he gets burned for it because he doesn't understand that the rules have changed. And and the reason I brought this up is because it seems like we might be in the same situation. The rules are changing, or maybe they changed a long time ago, and we're just realizing it.
I think they always change. And I think we're always in this flux. And one of the ways we comfort ourselves is to imagine that we have eras or epochs where things are relatively the same. But I think we're always in flux, and I think that's why it's so hard to get a handle on it.
And we also imagine that there are absolute ethics and absolute morals.
Right.
Because we want to think there are rules. But the truth is that the rules are what you make of them, and they are dictated by what your goals are.
There are no always and nevers. There's always this.
Yeah.
We live in the gray, yet we want things to be very clearly defined.
And because that's what we're taught through church, that's what we're taught through school, is like learn these principles, learn these skills, because the world is black and white. And at 18 or 19 or 20, you move out of your parents' house and you go out into the world and you realize, no, it's just extreme version, layers of gray.
And laws tell us that, and driving around with traffic lights and everything tells us that we have confines that we must.
And if within our DNA we're hunters and gatherers and we're trying to survive, and we've been given the set of skills that are black and white, and we're now in a world that's thoroughly gray with the rules constantly changing and moving, we are frustrated. Yeah, and how do you survive that? It's a big kick to your self-esteem when you thought you're going this way, and all of a sudden the goal switches to somewhere else.
Well, I think I can imagine initially that laws and mores and norms and all of those things were concessions to individuality. So we're all different, and here's a way: if we establish these guidelines, we can all live more or less harmoniously together. But what we tend to do, I think, as human beings, is when we find something that works a little bit, we just want to make a dogma out of it, and say that now this isn't a facilitating idea any longer. This is now simply how it must be.
Right, and we're not going to stop at our borders. Yeah. We're going to go kill a bunch of people because they're not following our rules.
But isn't that kind of the trouble that the later years of the Vietnam War got into with Kissinger? We said, okay, well, let's go into Cambodia and screw the borders because I see a problem there. I'm going to fix it. And maybe the problem is.
I'll say yes, and we can move on.
Okay.
Vietnam is too big of a topic to bring up right now, without its own show. But yes, diplomatic or political expression creates problems because you're trying to apply, this set of rules to a culture that has its own background, has its own goals, and.
Okay, so I think we've spent a good bit of time defining the problem. It seems, as I hear it, the solution is to be happy, is to go very zen, total zen, extreme zen, be happy as nothing.
What does zen mean to you?
Zen means it goes back to if you're training yourself to be your career, you're training yourself to think that you are the success of your family and your success in life. If that can be taken away from you, and oftentimes it can be taken away very easily, and you're not those things, so what are you? You are that person on the inside. These outward expressions are not you. And so if you can, when you're living amongst it, see yourself on the inside and realize that is you. And nothing is maybe not the right word, that has a lot of negative connotations. But if you can get down to the very essence of who you are and be happy as that, then go out and do your job. And then go out and interact with your family. Then maybe that'll give you a lot more satisfaction in life and happiness. And
I think that's interesting and maybe a very high-level goal. But practically, no man that I know has time to find his soul before he eats dinner and feeds his family. It must be done simultaneously. It must be done in every moment.
Well, exactly.
You must fight the dragons and feed the family.
You got to get the kids to school. You got to deal with your job, and maybe you don't like your job, or maybe your job is very stressful. You get home, you have dinner with your family, help your children with homework, deal with whatever household problems you need to deal with. Maybe deal with some financial issues, or do your taxes, or whatever. And then you're supposed to read some books and do some, Zen meditation. And no, you turn on the TV or throw on some video games, and then prep yourself to do it all over tomorrow. And that's the, there's a lot of Zen sayings or teachings or even book titles that say first enlightenment and then the dishes. And it doesn't mean the problems go away, but it's just like,
I think it's the same thing. Dishes and enlightenment are the same.
But other than that, you find yourself at 40, you find yourself with a mortgage and a household of issues, and teenagers who are rolling their eyes at you, and all of a sudden you say, this isn't what I signed up for, but you can't walk away.
But that questioning is the beginning.
I mean, you could walk away.
That's the beginning of wisdom, is asking those questions. Nietzsche tells the parable in the beginning of Thus Spake Zarathustra that our job, before we become human, before we can be human, is to slay a dragon that has thou shalt written on every one of its golden scales. Mm-hmm. So we have to get rid of all the shoulds and oughts and musts. We have to throw those all away and allow ourselves to explore our own nature, which consists not only of masculine, as Morgan said earlier, but of the feminine elements too, of receptivity and nurturing and all of those kinds of
But how does one do that when the laundry's piling up, the taxes have to be...
By doing the laundry, by doing the taxes.
Yeah. That's how one is drawn into those questions.
We have this fantasy that there's a cave up on a mountain where we'll be able to escape and find enlightenment there. But all you find is the reduction of problems that you become non-functional.
You just find another orthodoxy. It's monks retreat into convents of any religious order, and they don't find freedom. They find more rules. Mm-hmm. That's not the answer. A retreat isn't the answer. You have to be willing to participate in your own suffering with joy, with willingness.
Well, I find it awfully convenient that the enlightened people that we look at that we hold up on the pedestal, look at the Buddha, Siddhartha. He left his family. His baby was a week old, and he walked away from his family. You look at Jesus, and if you want conspiracy theory you would hold to, maybe he didn't have a family, and he just prayed. He could take 40 days and go to the desert and pray, and he can spend that lost period studying and training. You look at some of the great souls like Gandhi, not married, didn't have those family issues.
And they're the exception. Why would I think that enlightenment needs that level of bizarre circumstance?
Because how do you concentrate on your inner soul when you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay the rent?
How are you not going to?
I don't know. Well, and that's what our friends of ours that we all know, and her sister was a Buddhist monk for like 20 years, and literally just walked. No job, no money, no nothing. Just walked, and she lived in a culture where this was considered a wonderful expression of spiritualism, and people would take care of her, hand her food, or hand her money for food, because that would help their karma. So I'm looking at
that support system. If you want to do that, that's cool.
But the thing is, why she gets to be enlightened?
Is she?
And
what is your
they say that?
What's your definition?
I don't know. I'm just saying that because
then you're telling a story.
I know I'm telling a story, but my point of the story is that this woman is considered enlightened because she was able to walk around by herself, whereas
is that what you want?
No, that's not what I want. But
it doesn't matter.
No, I know, but I say, how do you she got her 12 hours a day of study and meditating and thinking, and people taking care of her, whereas the rest of us, half an hour, 15 minutes a day, if we put in the time, how do we get to that spiritual level or that inner level when there doesn't seem to be any time? I went on a scouting camping trip a couple weekends ago, and I was really nervous about it because there's a father coming who has anger management issues and has blown up at the kids before, and there's a couple of kids doing this massive backpacking trip, and there's probably 60% of them were newbies, never done backpacking before, and I'm thinking this could go very wrong because we're going out there. We have to get 6 miles out because that's where the water is. And we can only carry, 1 day's worth of water. So we have to get 6 miles out. If these kids coop out at 2 miles, we're kind of in trouble. So I was really, really worried about this. And I was talking to my wife about it, and I'm having anxiety about it. I'm like, what a great spiritual retreat this is for me. Because I could go to a cave, or I could go down to Costa Rica and go to a yoga retreat and do that. But then how does that help me in the real world? Here's the real world on an extreme level. And could I use this is dishes on a massive scale, or laundry on a massive scale? And how can I deal with these issues and still say, thank you for the opportunity. And deal with all the muck and the yuck. And it comes down to, it's easy to be nice to and love a nice person, but if that person's an idiot and angry and a harsh person, how do you be loving to that person? And it becomes a huge spiritual retreat when all this converges on one weekend. I thought, well, that's probably better for me than going to...
absolutely. I think that's what Morgan was saying.
Echelon.
He finally told the story of his own soul, not referring to some movie or something. That was the greatest story I've ever heard you tell. That. You see how you answered?
Well, I'll press that out and put that in front.
It's not an accident that there in the subcontinent and in Asia, in the Buddhist culture, there's all these bodhisattvas that are worshipped. There's Manjushri and I mean, you can just reel off this whole list. The most beloved of the bodhisattvas is Vimalakirti. He's the most familiar. He's the most common household, icon, and that's because he's a householder. He's a regular guy. He's a family man, and he works, and he has managed through that to attain this level of enlightenment, I guess, if one wants to call it that allows him to be a bodhisattva. I don't think that's accidental. I think it's easy to go off and perfect a very narrow and deep area of one's life, but the cost of that's always relationship. And the challenge is, how do we become who we already are in some aspects in the context of relatedness? Because I think we need that as human beings. We need relationship. We need that as men. This idea of the lone, rugged individual, as you guys were talking about earlier, is dying. It's not, and we haven't figured out how to carry it forward yet, because now we're doing the rugged individual in the context of a group, and that's not working either. And we have to get to this next level somehow, and we do that through the willingness to struggle with this stuff, and knowing that the struggling isn't a failure, that actually failure isn't failure, that there's something about failure we don't really understand in this culture at all. That's a tremendous gift.
Well, I think failure, and here maybe that's a show in of itself, but we are graded from kindergarten all the way up through, depending on if you're going off to college and how far you go in college, from 4 years old to maybe 25 years old. And our mistakes are held up in front of us and fingers wag at us, say, you are wrong, you're no good at this, do it better next time. And you look at all the successful people in the world, and they failed over and over and over again, only they didn't see them as failures, they saw them as the next step in towards their success. Exactly. You're only a failure if you walk away. I'm sure you see this all the time, Morgan, in the work you do with your students. It's like, okay, that's not how you do it. It's not a failure unless you don't come back tomorrow. But if you continue to work on it and perfect it, then you will finally get it. And if we could stop looking at failure as failure and just another step in the learning process.
When I was a kid, every holiday, family would get together, and my uncle and my father would argue about who the best hitter in baseball was. It was the same argument every goddamn time. And one would say Ted Williams, and the other one would say Ty Cobb, and they would argue. And it didn't occur to me until much later in my life that it really wasn't important who was the best. Regardless of who you picked, they failed to get a hit 60% of the time. And it was the willingness to fail that made them the best.
That's the same with Babe Ruth. For the longest time, for something like 40 years or something ridiculous, he was the home run king. No one hit more home runs than him, but the other statistic that nobody refers to is he was also the strikeout king. He had more strikeouts than home runs. The dude just swung at everything. And if you ever see those old photos of him, he whacks it and then he watches. And he was kind of a portly guy. And he couldn't run the bases very fast, so he had to hit it out of the park, otherwise he wasn't even going to get on base. But so he swung at everything and struck out more times than he hit home runs, but nobody remembered that, or nobody thought to look at that.
Yeah, well, he's not celebrated for that.
No.
We're celebrated for exception for some reason.
But the thing is, most people fail because they give up.
Right.
You know,
What would you do if you had the experience of failing 60% of the time at that? I mean, how would you continue to do it?
Yeah.
Most of us wouldn't continue to do that.
It depends on how badly your heart wants it.
Yeah. And the willingness to be able to fail most of the time is what makes one truly great.
So that's the phrase for this for today. Swing at everything.
Swing it.
No, not just swing it. That's different. Swing at everything. That's what it is to be a man. And that's what we've lost. Because we're scared. Because we don't want to fail.
Well, yeah, we're scared because we've been set up to fear failure. We're going to be graded and we're going to be punished. And
So
who wants that?
Swing at everything.
Well, you know, and why try if you're just going to be told you're wrong?
Well, this is the thing. I don't think you've really given anything all you have until you reach that point where you can't make it work. And so you fail. And it seems to me that in failure is the only way we really understand the edges of ourselves. It's the only way we really have the experience of giving everything to something is when we fail. And failures, I think should be valorized rather than I mean, most of the heroes in mythology and in cinema or literature, they fail. They're failed heroes. You know, Shane rides away at the end of the movie and he's dead. You know, John Wayne dies in Iwo Jima, and I mean, all these heroic images, they fail. It's a relatively recent phenomenon where we need these heroes to succeed and wrap everything up nicely with a bow.
Well, and it's the same with a lot of the new movies. The Avengers and the X-Men, these are damaged people. And they're annoying people, and they don't get along with each other. And they have to find a way to work it out.
No, you miss the point. At the end of the movie, this is prevalent in Asian movies too. At the end of at the end of Japanese or Chinese movies, at the end of kung fu movies, the hero often just dies. He's given everything. Now, being a damaged hero is different. You know, the psychosis that leads to Batman putting on a mask and fighting crime is different. That's a celebration of being able to be crazy and do cool stuff. And it just magically turning out all right. And, you know, the military not coming down on this guy. But that's a fantasy. That's and it reflects our cultural obsession with individuality, too.
Well, and I think it is off topic too, but the appeal to Batman, at least for myself, because he was my favorite superhero growing up, is that he was just a regular guy. There was nothing special other than his $1 billion and his brain. Superman comes from a different planet. Incredible Hulk, does that because of the gamma rays. He wasn't bitten by a radioactive spider, or he has a special ring which lets him fly. He was just a guy who saw problems and decided to help out. Just happened to have some money and had the smarts to do it, but he was relatable in most senses in that he was frustrated, confused a lot of the times, but he still went out and got beat up, but he was still a success 90% of the time, and that was appealing to me anyway, because while I could say I can't be Superman, and I can't be the Incredible Hulk, even though I love the Incredible Hulk, and I can't be the Fantastic Four because of all these extreme circumstances that turned him into superheroes. But here's a guy who's a superhero, and with the exception of the money, and if I study hard in school, I could be that kind of superhero.
But I'm going to go out on a limb and say, Batman's not going to be around in 400 years. And the Avengers won't be around in 400 years. But Macbeth and King Lear and Richard III will still be around in 300, 400 years. And they have been around already for 400 years. And it's because they fail so gloriously. And there's no redemption. there's no redemption for Richard. You know, he's an awful human being, and he fails, and we're rooting for his failure.
But do we want that anymore? Look at our movies today and our stories today.
Well, what I'm saying
we must
is,
have them have a happy ending.
What I'm saying is we misunderstood failure. We misunderstand the opportunity that failure provides. There's nothing more beautiful than Lear realizing what a fool he's been. You know, as he's kneeling over the dead body of his jester, and you don't really know if it's his court jester or if it's his daughter Cordelia, and he says, "My poor dead fool." There's nothing that's more beautiful than Macbeth realizing that he's waist deep in blood and that there's no way out for him.
Are these characters losers?
Yeah.
But who
they die. They're failed heroes.
But if we don't, who wants to celebrate that though? You know, we want to celebrate people who have massive success and laugh at the losers. Look at YouTube. We want to laugh at the losers.
That's why we have the situation we have in culture today, because failure is kind of the salt that tempers a society. When we properly understand failure, we don't become hubristic. We don't become exporters of democracy and white bread all over the world. We recognize that humanity has limits, and that if you become inflated, if you become hubristic, there's a terrible price to pay. And that's not the case right now in our culture. We think that the more powerful you become, the more that you can bend the world to your will, that's the better. And you see this in the movie heroes now. They're incredibly hubristic. And you know, the smart-ass comments, you know, at this horrible, you know, eviscerating kind of death, and they make some, you know, funny joke about it. It's hubris. You know, there's not the sense of tragedy that there once was in our culture. And maybe because we become so comfortable, we don't want to think about that.
I just think we have those characters in society, and instead of kings and monarchy, they're the rulers of Wall Street. And if you see, I haven't seen it, but from what I understand, that Martin Scorsese movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, it's a very King Lear, Macbeth, Richard III kind of character. Only he walks away at the end, happy, without getting in trouble. And I think we see that with the banking scandal that happens. Who got nailed for any of that? Who got in trouble for doing massively illegal things, for harming hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people? And who got in trouble for it? What politician got in trouble for it? And they get to walk away happy. The villains get to walk away now. But you know, if Macbeth and Richard III, King Lear were written today, they'd walk away happy. You'd think, oh well.
That's social commentary. We're free to do that. There have been much worse tragedies in history than the banking scandal, where, you know, millions of people are actually killed. Culture is a complicated thing with complicated goals. I don't know how this relates specifically to what it is to be a man, because you can make changes in your individual life that reflect your sensibilities, and it takes a long time for those actions to ripple out. I think the answer to your questions are that we have not been true to ourselves, so society has grown in a way that is not true to us. We've created this monster. It's not some alien force that's put us in this situation. We've put ourselves in this situation, and we can rectify it over time.
But is the monster being afraid of failure? Afraid of being a loser?
Yeah.
Of ending up, you know, trying your hardest and things going wrong and ending up like Macbeth and Richard III just dead at the end in a pool of blood?
The real enemy is our own comfort. we want to preserve our own comfort at any price.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant.
We're not willing to be uncomfortable.
Or we'd rather be comfortably miserable, as I read somebody say, rather be comfortably miserable than put in the work to make the changes.
Yeah.
Because we don't.
If you're comfortable long enough, then the changes will happen. The discomfort will come back for.
Well, and then we talked about this too. You have to hit that rock bottom in part, and that's why I think you were saying at the end of episode 1, you were saying, I wouldn't say excited, but you're like, okay, you've hit rock bottom. Financial problems, family problems, what have you. You're finally coming to me so we can work this up. This is good. You're not in a great place right now, but you are awake to the fact that you're in this box.
Yeah, and there's a gift available. There's a treasure in that's waiting to be discovered. And our unwillingness to go to those places prevents us from really discovering those very important aspects of life.
That's what society is designed to perpetuate, is keeping us from that rock bottom, because if enough of us hit that rock bottom, then we're going to change things. And society as an entity will be faced with that conflict and will perish in its current incarnation.
Okay, so we realize we're in the box, we're peeking over the edge of the box, and we have 15 minutes a day, half an hour a day maybe, to work on ourselves. What do we do?
Well, we're working on ourselves constantly, hopefully.
Well, you're distracted by the nonsense at work, you're distracted by just getting the kids breakfast and dinner and doing the shopping.
Those aren't distractions, those are life. Those activities are life. You treat them as life. These are the things that make you up.
Sure, but they're boring and uninteresting, and I'd rather be do.
You have the opportunity, though, to bring that sensibility to every one of those activities. And that's where the real growth happens. It doesn't happen by removing yourself from the world or from relationship. I think that's a really harmful idea that seems to be really pervasive, however. That somehow, you have to go into your sacred space and be alone and all that stuff. But, what happens if you wash the dishes as though you wash your 6-month-old baby in the bath? I mean, what if you bring that sensibility to doing the dishes? Then that becomes an entirely different experience that you're having. And that's the challenge, is to bring that sensibility to our mundane lives and to our daily domestic experience. And then the ordinary becomes extraordinary that way. And I think that's...
And then maybe that's the gift. It's like, how do you make this boring, uninteresting job that you hate? How do you bring the excitement and... Well, maybe not excitement's not the right word, but how do you bring that attention and find a way to make that interesting?
Yeah.
Or happy.
By doing
that's the work.
By doing it as well as you can, which is not something that happens anymore.
Yeah.
Because those low-paying jobs now...
Or even the high-paying jobs.
Yeah.
It's all an attitude. I mean, people talk about, I want to take a vacation and sit on the beach for a week. I mean, what could be more boring than that? That's worse. I mean, that's not even being productive. It's not even being engaged. That's...
Because there's so
this fantasy of disengagement is... I don't even know where that comes from.
Because
they're
so overwhelmed that they need to shut down and reboot.
Well, yeah, and if you have to get away...
And that's where it's this daily life thing.
If you have to get away from your daily life, something is wrong with the way you're living your daily life.
But they know that. They know they're in the box. How do they get out of the box? I mean, they just can't all of a sudden, they could pull a Siddhartha and just say, hey, I'm out of here.
No, that's missing the point, though. You're bringing the box with you. You have to... The box... You are the box. I mean, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but the box is you.
I understand that, but the people listening to this, they're just wonderful. They're going to have to go to work tomorrow.
We all have to go to work.
I know, but it's the same job they're trying to get in the same situation that they're trying to drink themselves out of or trying to numb themselves to. They don't like this experience they're in. their teenage children are still going to roll their eyes at them and be smart mouthed, and it's like, okay, maybe that's a parenting thing, they said, but they're still in this situation that they want to go on a cruise and get away from, or sit on the beach and reboot.
I hope they do.
But they still.
But they're going to get into their job.
Right, but they still have to go back to that job.
Get over it. Get over yourself. Get over this idea that you have brought to us that you should be happy. Just live. That is happy.
We do have some limited ability to change. We do have some limited ability to make changes in our lives, and that's one of the things. If we realize we're feeling that way, then we have an obligation to ourselves to make some changes. Now,
I don't want some changes. I want massive change.
Well, I don't know that you can have that.
Well, then you have to make massive changes. Then if you really want massive changes, whatever that is, then you're going to have to burn your house down and move to Vegas and be a stripper.
But that just brings your problems with it. I know you just said that, and you reminded of a Wayne Dyer quote. He says, if you want some changes in your life, you're going to have to make some changes in your life. And maybe that's what it comes down to, and you need to make a list, and maybe this is where the help comes in. This is where getting a team together or getting a coach.
Be careful what you wish for, though. What you actually want is gradual change.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
So,
and that's why I'm saying this is where the coach and or the team or the whoever comes into play. It's like they can, because with your work, Morgan, somebody comes to you right away and they want to take on that. They saw that movie and they thought, there's that guy in the center and there's 5 people attacking him. That's what I want. Let's do that. And you think, no, we have to build up to that. Otherwise, you get so far away from your comfort zone that you run right back to it because you're uncomfortable. And that's why I think it's helpful, and that's why I had trouble for so long, because I refused to ask for help. I refused to get a coach. I thought that was ridiculous. You look at any successful person. Let's even use sports. Let's use baseball. How many coaches does a baseball player have? Batting, running, whatever position you're playing, maybe nutrition, something like that. Same with any Olympic athlete on the podium with a gold medal around their neck. How many coaches does that person have? How much training did that person go through? Any CEO that has any sort of success has some sort of coaching going on, whether it's how to manage people or marketing or sales or getting their employees enthused about what they're doing. They're constantly going through coaching. They're always asking for help. And I think as individuals, when we look at our inner lives, we think somehow we should already be happy. If we're not, then we're failures. We don't want to admit failure.
Okay.
I don't know what I just said, but there you go.
You just said what we were talking about.
Yeah, I guess. All right, so is there homework for people?
Swinging everything, man. Swinging everything.
All right, well, how about this will be up on the Facebook page. What's your opinion? What's your comments? What's your feelings about being a man in today's world? What is it supposed to be? What are your ideas? Go to the Facebook page, facebook.com/Tipping Point Radio, and look for this show and give us your comments and swing at everything.
That's right.
All right. See you next time.